Okay, so let's actually talk about what happened with Emma Watson. Not the version where she's the thoughtful actress who wanted a normal life. That version is true. But it's also the version Warner Bros. Is perfectly happy for you to believe. The full version is more interesting. Here it is. She spent a decade of her childhood generating $7 billion for one studio. $7 billion. With a B. And at the exact moment her commercial value was at its peak, when the franchise was ending and her leverage would never be higher, she walked into a room with Warner Brothers and asked for something specific, something that had nothing to do with salary. They said no. She left. And everything she's done in the 13 years since is the answer to what they refused to give her. Here's what the press has agreed not to examine. The official narrative goes, talented girl grows up in franchise, goes to university, becomes an activist, selective career. Inspiring. Principled. And that's all true. But it's framed as a choice made freely without friction. As if she floated out of the Harry Potter machine and gracefully redirected herself. There was friction. There was a very specific negotiation in which the studio communicated what it was willing to provide and what it was not. And what it was not willing to provide is the thing that would have made staying worthwhile to her. The press hasn't asked about that because the entertainment press isn't organized around what did the studio refuse to give the person who generated $7 billion. This video is organized around that. There are three things we need to look at. The first is what she was actually asking for, not vaguely creative input, but the specific thing that studios almost never give actors and that she understood she needed. The second is what Brown University really represented. People cover it as she wanted to be a student. It's more precise than that. She understood something about what the industry was offering and what it wasn't, and the university was a direct response to the gap. The third is what the decade since has actually been. Because when you lay it out chronologically, what looks like disconnected choices about activism and books and selective acting is actually a very deliberate construction. She's been building something. Here's what. Emma Watson was born on April 15th, 1990, in Paris, raised in Oxford, the daughter of two lawyers. Her drama teacher submitted her name for the Harry Potter audition in 1999. She was 9. She had never acted professionally. The casting search involved tens of thousands of children across the UK, across multiple rounds. She was called back, tested, and cast as Hermione Granger. And I want you to understand what she was entering. The Harry Potter books were already a cultural phenomenon of the kind that happens maybe twice in a generation. Books that had produced a specific image of Hermione in millions of minds before a single frame was shot. She was going to have to be that image, not just on screen. In promotional materials, press junkets, magazine covers, merchandise, theme parks, and every market in the world. She was 9 years old. Neither she nor the adults around her fully grasped what that meant. The promotional machine for Potter is worth describing because most people don't appreciate the scale. A new Potter film wasn't just a film release. It was a coordinated global event. The press junkets lasted weeks. City after city, interview after interview, the same questions asked by rotating journalists in every major market. And you're doing this as the primary commercial face of the event. You're giving enthusiastic, fresh answers in London, then New York, then Tokyo, then Sydney, and any interview that's less than enthusiastic becomes a story. She was doing this from age 11. By 21, the 8th time, she had been through 8 worldwide promotional tours. She was extraordinarily good at it. Watch any interview from the later years. Engaging, articulate, warm. None of that was effortless. All of it was professional, and all of it was being done by someone who was simultaneously starting to understand she wanted a completely different professional future. The specific creative frustration she's described in post-franchise interviews is important to understand precisely. The Hermione of the books 5 through 7 especially, is a character of genuine and sometimes abrasive intellectual intensity. She's right a lot. She knows she's right. She's morally serious. She makes significant errors. She has a furious pride that sometimes costs her. She's complicated. The Hermione of the later films is considerably simpler, more supportive of Harry, less independently significant, more reactive than active. Emma Watson was aware of this in real time. She raised it. She was told, not dismissively, but clearly, that the production's priorities were the production's priorities. She did the work anyway, and did it exceptionally well. But she understood from that experience something very specific about the difference between being employed by a commercial apparatus and being a partner in it. That distinction became everything. By the final films, she was one of the most commercially recognizable young actresses on the planet. The franchise had grossed $7.7 billion. She had contributed 12 years of her childhood and adolescence, starting at 9. And in conversations with Warner Bros. About what came next, the studio's offer was essentially more of the same, more franchise, more commercially managed deployment of the brand. Compensation in the form of a salary, substantial but still a salary rather than a structural relationship to the commercial output of her own image and her own work. What she asked for, and what the studio was not organized to provide, was creative partnership. Not a larger salary, a seat at the table, the right to be a collaborator rather than a contractor. The studio said no, not cruelly, just that's not how we do this. She understood the answer. She left. And here's the piece that changes the meaning of everything that follows, because this is the part most people miss. The Brown University enrollment, which everyone covers as this heartwarming story about wanting a normal life, isn't primarily that. It's a strategic decision by someone who understood exactly what the industry was and wasn't going to provide. She had just spent 12 years in an apparatus that managed her image, her schedule, her physical presentation, and her professional choices with the thoroughness that a multi-billion-dollar franchise requires. She had asked for a different relationship to her own professional life. The answer was no, and she understood that the only way to build the internal foundation she needed, the intellectual identity, the credibility outside the franchise, the personal development that 12 years of promotional schedules had made difficult, was to step outside the apparatus entirely and build it somewhere else. The film choices in the years immediately after the franchise are all deliberate anti-Hermione statements. The Perks of Being a Wallflower in 2012, independent, intimate, emotionally messy in ways the franchise never permitted. The Bling Ring in 2013 for Sofia Coppola. She played Nikki, a shallow, self-obsessed, celebrity-obsessed teenager who is the direct inverse of everything Hermione represents. She took a significant financial step down to make Perks. She took Bling Ring because Sofia Coppola is not a director who casts accidentally, and Emma Watson, playing a celebrity worship character while simultaneously enrolled at Brown, was a very clear statement about distance. Her Noah in 2014, directed by Darren Aronofsky, added dramatic scale in a different register entirely. These aren't a random collection of interesting projects. They're a systematic demonstration of range to an industry that had 11 years of evidence suggesting she was only one thing. Her appointment as a UN Women Goodwill Ambassador in 2014 and the He for She speech in September of that year, she'd been ambassador for 4 months, she was 24, is the moment where the platform the franchise built gets aimed at something the franchise never could. The speech called on men and boys to engage with gender equality as their issue. In 2014, that was more contested than it sounds now. She received specific, credible threats afterward that law enforcement investigated. She continued. The speech was watched by millions within days, and it gave her access to institutions, to policy conversations, to the specific leverage that a public platform deployed with genuine intellectual seriousness generates, that the franchise model was specifically organized to not produce. She built this access herself, using the tools the franchise had provided in a direction the franchise never intended. Here's what she actually built in the 13 years since the franchise ended, laid out clearly. The Brown degree, the Oxford program in sustainable technology, not a hobby but graduate level work in a field at the center of the most significant economic questions of the next generation. The UN work, the book club, our shared shelf which selected feminist texts and ran for 3 years. The activism, the selective film choices, Beauty and the Beast in 2017 on terms that gave her creative input she used, then Little Women in 2019, and then essentially nothing on terms the industry keeps offering. She's been linked to projects. She passes. She has said she doesn't want a career that the industry defines. That's not a retirement. That's a position. The commercial infrastructure of the franchise continues to generate revenue without her. The streaming rights, the merchandise, the theme parks, she gets nothing from those now. She built something else. Whether it was worth it is a question you can only answer if you know what she was trying to build. And what she was trying to build is now pretty clearly visible. The Noah film in 2014, Darren Aronofsky's massive, strange biblical epic, is a project that most concretely demonstrates what selective means in her film choices. She played Ela in a film that required dramatic range, in a register completely unlike anything the franchise had required. It was challenging, unusual, and commercially risky. It grossed 300 million worldwide, which means it worked, but it was the kind of choice that her commercial profile at that moment could have avoided easily. She made it because Aronofsky interested her and because the challenge was real. She made it during the same period she was completing her Brown degree, which tells you something about how she managed her time and her priorities. The university work wasn't a retreat from the professional work. It was happening simultaneously by design. And here's the La La Land detail that everyone gets wrong. She was offered the lead in La La Land. She turned it down. Emma Stone went on to play Mia and won the Academy Award for Best Actress. When people point at this as evidence of a bad decision, they miss the point completely. She turned it down because she already had a commitment. Beauty and the Beast, which she had agreed to beforehand, she didn't fail to recognize it as a good film. She made a choice based on an existing commitment, and the commitment was Beauty and the Beast, which grossed $1.2 billion. In the 2017 version, Belle is more active, more curious, more explicitly a reader and inventor. Watson had specific conversations with the production about how Belle was presented, and those conversations had visible results. The film gave her the creative partnership that the Warner Bros. Offer hadn't. And then she used the commercial result of that film to step back further, which is exactly what someone does when they've gotten what they came for. Our shared shelf, the book club she ran from 2016 to 2019, is something people treat as a charming celebrity side project. And that is actually considerably more interesting than that. It selected feminist texts, not the most commercially obvious choice. It generated a community of readers who engage with the material seriously. She ran it for 3 years and then closed it, explaining she needed time for other commitments. The commitments were the Oxford program in sustainable technology, the ongoing UN work, the advocacy initiatives. Sustainable technology is graduate level work in a field at the center of the most significant economic and geopolitical questions of the next generation. She's not studying it because it's interesting, though it probably is. She's studying it because it's the field where the advocacy work she wants to do intersects with the institutional access her platform provides. It's the infrastructure for the next decade of work. Here's what I think is the cleanest way to see what she actually built. The franchise gave her access. The access gave her a platform. The platform could have been used to maximize commercial returns. More franchise, more endorsements, more of the machine. She used it instead to build the specific set of capabilities and institutional relationships that produce the kind of impact she's trying to have. The Brown degree was that infrastructure. The UN role was that infrastructure. The book club was that infrastructure. The Oxford program is that infrastructure. She is, at 35, in a substantially different professional position than any of the paths the commercial logic would have produced. Less visible, less conventionally successful, and by every available signal, exactly where she intended to be. The franchise continues to generate revenue from her image without her participation. The life she built with the access is not measurable by franchise metrics. Subscribe now. The he for she speech is the moment worth dwelling on because it shows exactly what she was doing with the platform. She delivered it at the UN in September 2014. She had been a Goodwill ambassador for 4 months. She was 24 years old. The speech called on men and boys to see gender equality as their issue, rather than just women's. In 2014, that was more contested than it sounds now. She received specific, credible threats afterward that law enforcement investigated. She continued. The speech was watched by millions within days of its delivery. It generated coverage in every major market. And it gave her access to institutional conversations, to policy relationships, to the specific leverage that a public platform deployed with genuine intellectual seriousness generates in contexts the entertainment industry never enters. This was the kind of access the franchise had never provided, and that the franchise model, in which the performer's public presence is managed to serve the franchise's commercial interests, was specifically organized not to produce. She built it herself. She's in her mid-30s. No film since Little Women in 2019. The industry is still offering. She's still passing. And here's the most clarifying way to read that. The $7 billion franchise continues to generate revenue from her image and her childhood without requiring anything more from her. The streaming rights, the merchandise, the theme parks, she's receiving nothing from any of that now. The machine runs on its own. She built something else with the access the machine created before she left. Whether it was worth it is a question whose answer depends entirely on what she was trying to build. And what she was trying to build is now very clearly visible in the 13 years of choices since she walked out of Warner Bros. The franchise got the $7 billion. She got the rest. Here's what's genuinely interesting about the decades since. What looks like a series of unrelated choices, advocacy work, books, university programs, occasional acting, is actually a coherent construction. She was building the specific set of capabilities and institutional relationships that produce the kind of impact she actually wants to have. The Brown degree was infrastructure. The UN role was infrastructure. The Oxford program is infrastructure. She's not famous for being famous. She's not retired. She's building something that the franchise model could never have provided, using the access the franchise created before she left it. Whether you think she made the right call depends entirely on what you think the call was about. And now you know what it was about. Here's the simplest version of this story. A 9-year-old kid from Oxford goes to an audition on a whim and ends up as the commercial face of a $7 billion franchise for 12 years. At 21, at peak leverage, she asks for creative partnership. The studio says no. She enrolls at Brown, goes to the UN, does the Oxford program, writes books, and makes films when the terms are right. 13 years later, she's studying sustainable technology and hasn't been in a film since 2019. The industry is still offering she's still not taking. That's a coherent story if you know what she was asking for and why the no mattered. The franchise generates revenue from her childhood. Without her, she's building something else. Subscribe if there's something else is more interesting to you than the franchise. Subscribe now.